Over and over from different questions, it's been brought to my attention, we need to talk about batteries. So that's what we're going to do in this video today. So we're all starting to see more and more of these e-bikes come into play, and we're seeing different things that we're unfamiliar with when we're talking about the specs on them. Whether we're riding Surons, whether we're riding Talarias, either way, we're seeing these same things like AH, amps, volts, and other different things that we might be a little familiar with, but not completely. So we're going to go over some of that. Now this video can even relate to your regular batteries like we use in our construction world or in our garage. Even your batteries that your kids play with, whether they're lithium batteries, this is all really going to apply. So stay tuned and check it out. So the lithium batteries have come a little ways through the years, and this is where we started, where we used to cut them open and add on new BMS for safety. And we'll go over that here in a minute. So I think we're going to break this down into a few different selections, and we're going to take a look at those right now. All right, so let's try to break this down into 4 categories. So we're going to start off looking at max battery lifetime. We're also going to look at battery safety. We're going to look at battery quality. And then we're going to have general talk. All right, so there's a handful of things we want to talk about when we're talking about getting our max lifetime out of these batteries. So I think some of the obvious, we want to stay away from moisture and we want to stay away from the cold. So typically we don't want to store our batteries anywhere under really 40 degrees, even though it does happen, but mainly we definitely do not want to be charging under 40 degrees. So as you guys can see, of course, all my batteries were pulled in because we did just have a big cold snap in Colorado, and my garage is not yet heated. With that said, we also do not want to charge or keep it in too high of temperatures because it is going to be hard on our batteries. So we don't want to keep it in too hot or too cold of a place because that is going to be harmful to the battery, and we definitely do not want to charge it in too hot or too cold of a place. So we'll touch base on that with safety again later. Now another thing we're going to talk about is when storing our batteries, we do not want to store them completely full or completely empty. So I like to stay right around that 70 to 80% range. And that's where you want to kind of unplug it if you know you might not be riding your bike for a month or more. We're trying not to keep it at that too full of a spot or too empty. You will hear me refer to batteries like a water balloon just for an aspect for us to visually understand how to see it. It helps me kind of see it. So if we picture a water balloon totally full and we leave it set there for a long time, it's just harder on that water balloon. Same thing. So staying around that 70 to 80% mark just keeps it at a happy space for storage, and empty is just too depleted and it's not as happy. So along with those percentages, I do want to talk about the 20/80% rule, which is truly if you're charging your battery to 80% and if you're draining it to only 20%. So if it can go dead, you want to stay about 20% above what that is, and if you can fill it up 100%, pulling it off about 20% before that's full is going to create a longer lifetime of your battery in any sense. Same goes for a Tesla or our batteries. Most batteries actually do have the 20/80 built into their BMS, so these are actually never getting to 100%, they're only getting to 80%. We'll never fully see 100% out of these, and that's the way we want it to be. So along with that, I am going to talk about charging in general. Now, we do have some different fast charging stuff that you can see. And when I'm talking about charging, we're going to talk about amp input. So a fast charge to me would be above 10 amps, that 10 to 15 amps input is hard on your battery, just like filling that balloon very rapidly out of a huge faucet is going to be harder on it rather than slowly letting it fill. So I like to see right around 4 to 5 amp input, and that's where I charge all my batteries at. We'll see that 4 amp, we'll see that 5 amp, and that's right where I like to be around. maybe I do buy a faster amp charge around that 10 amp charge. I would not use that every time unless I knew I was trying to get back out later that day and I was needing a faster charge, or I wasn't gonna have time to monitor it and leave it on and get it charged where I wanted. I would take that fast charge. I would not want to charge that fast all the time. It is going to hurt your battery. I also want to make sure that we're not maxing over our input for our max charge current. Some batteries are going to be more around that 5 amp max, and we're not capable of fast charging even. And we also don't want to overdraw our amps, because if we are pulling out of our max peak amps and we're running those amps on a more advanced controller pulling amps, it is going to be harder on your battery, draining those cells faster, pulling those amps out when you need them. So we do want to make sure that our battery does match up our tune or our controller to what amps are being pulled out of it in those battery amps. So we'll check that as well. So another thing that I'm always talking about unplugging your batteries in general is to unplug your battery once it's full. Now I know if it gets full and you leave it plugged in, you are actually working your BMS to block that power to come in for it to know. The longer you're leaving that plugged in, you are using your BMS power to block that out. So unplugging it will extend the lifetime of your BMS being able to shut off that block, which is very important, of course, which we will get to next. Now this will bring me back to talking about water balloons, because in a sense, our battery is just a water balloon, and that water balloon never knows when it's full without us turning that faucet off or taking the water balloon off of the hose. So in a sense, that's what our BMS is in charge of, is telling that battery when it's done taking power and the charger to stop giving the power. So the charger is going to keep giving the power continuously, and the battery is going to keep taking it until it explodes. Without the BMS, it will just explode and won't know when it's full. So when the BMS fails, it's going to just fill up until it explodes, and we're going to know our BMS failed and potentially burnt our house down. So that is number one why I'll always say, in general, don't charge overnight. I don't charge my camera batteries overnight. I don't charge my drone batteries overnight. I charge my phone overnight because I have to, and that's it. So like we've talked about, we want to make sure that we unplug right away so that we're not using that BMS to be blocking that power when it's full charging, and we want to always be monitoring our batteries when we are charging. Now, whether it's a good BMS or bad BMS, better safe than sorry. It is always better to have a more quality ANT BMS is what I've always used, and is what's on my batteries today. Now, along with that, we always do want to be monitoring our temperatures, which in ANT BMS we can connect, and it does have a live reading for its temperature within the BMS, and some other sensors that we can see dangling around on these batteries here. So they are usually installed into the batteries, and you'll be able to kind of monitor that a little bit better and feel a little safer about it, along with some extra safeties that are in that BMS to keep the battery safe. For a long time, I've just bought crappy batteries, completely chopped them apart, and then soldered on a totally new, reliable, quality BMS into each individual cell. So we can see here an old chopped apart BTR battery that, if you're familiar with, these are very dangerous batteries because they put a very bad BMS on, and these are known for catching on fire when charging. Now, along with talking about monitoring our heat, we do want to never charge in the sun. So say our battery is sitting out in the sun, the bike's sitting in the sun, the charger's sitting in the sun, we're all plugged in and charging. That's bad. That is not what we want to do. We want to try to pull the charger and the battery or the bike itself into a shaded area anytime and try to keep that charging in a cooler environment. So of course, like we talked about, not too cold, but if it's a hot summer sunny day and you guys are down in Dallas, Texas on a ride and you're going to quit a quick charge, try to find a quick shaded charge to go ahead and plug into. So don't touch our positive and negative together in any way, no matter what. That is very important and is very dangerous. Now, these two right now, because we're not plugged in, we can touch together as a demonstration. Now, if this were to be plugged into the battery and this touched, this could ruin your battery and will definitely create a large spark and enough to kind of make you jump. So this is always what we want to hook into a controller, and anytime have these separate. And these are going to be the last things that we ever want to be plugging in when we know everything is 100% ready to go. And we're just going to plug these in while we're ready to unplug in case anything crazy happens. So with talking about that, we also do not want to touch these two together because that is initially the same thing. So seeing this battery, we can see that we have these two coming off of it. If we were to touch metal from here to here, we will see a large spark and we will fry the BMS or potentially ruin the battery and create a fire. So we always want to be sure that those are in no way able to touch any metal together. Now, I know that sounds silly, but if you for some reason try to get a clamp or your needle nose and clip something on, if you're working on something yourself, that metal sitting between these two is going to be enough for it to arc across there, create a spark, probably melt this connector, and we'll take a look at a demonstration of when that's happened to me before. So that's what you're going to be looking at, is one of these fried up clips, and it's going to be kind of scary with a fireball pretty big in size in front of your face, and again can ruin your battery. So just something to always be aware of. We want to be sure that we're never ever touching any of the metal together in any way whatsoever. So we also want to talk about placement. When we're putting it inside of a bike, we want to make sure that it's somewhere good and that we maybe have some foam padding or something around to kind of protect, along with it strapped down. So if we're doing any jumps or wheelies and we tip over, that battery is not able to get punctured in any way. Where these don't have much of a casing and we could puncture right through, these are a little more of a hard shell and have a little bit more strength to it. I always like to get the battery covers on as well. Now last is going to be tune, and that's a little more playing into your advanced controllers, which I have a few in my hand, and there's some others that we will be going through, but you basically don't want to be pulling too many amps out of your battery if it's not rated for it and you did add a better BMS on. That could be dangerous and you could result in some sort of fire or malfunction that you don't want to really go down that road. So always make sure that the math is correct for what output your cells are rated for, what your BMS is letting out, and everything. If not, just buy a trusted battery that you know we have videos showing what you can expect out of it and what it's capable of, and you have a safety video to know how to treat it. So now that is for more of people who are doing DIY stuff. For the majority of you who are just buying a good quality battery, you are going to be just set with an BMS inside. And if you cannot afford a good quality battery, once again, I just recommend never charge overnight or unattended. Always just be keeping an eye on that charge and follow along with all these safety tips to ensure the best safety that you can. If you're new here and you haven't yet, please do like and subscribe. It helps the channel and helps keep me going on helping all you guys stay informed and get quality, safe parts. Next, we're going to look at battery quality, just kind of looking at different builds of batteries and things that we can do to have more quality builds. So, I mean, hopefully you guys get the gist of the BMS. It is a very important part of the battery. So if you're seeing a more expensive battery and it has an ANT BMS on it, then you're getting what you're paying for most likely also, because that is just more of a quality BMS. That is what we'll always have on ours. And a lot of other batteries are just putting a cheap $5 to $10 BMS on it, rather than these that cost me over $100 to buy and then still need to be installed. So just a better route to go. Our casing, and with that I basically mean how the battery is wrapped up. So we're going to see different things where these are basically soft cells and they don't have any protection. There was shrink wrap around it when I bought them. That's about it. Obviously I cut in. We will see hard plastic PVC wrap. I do like to have this on most of my batteries. That's done great for me and kept my batteries safe. I like to have a little bit more than just shrink wrap, so these are wrapped and shrink wrapped. And then for a little more heavy duty, we're all familiar with kind of that metal casing that we see with some other companies, but these are a great option as well. This is for the Moto B1 that we are knowing it's going to be treated more like a dirt bike. So just add a little bit extra onto it for that metal casing. Another thing I do want to just talk about in general is our plastic battery covers when it comes to razors. I like to have them on. It's just a little extra second protection. So my batteries from EMF have all been designed so that we can get those battery covers back on, and they will cover and kind of work as a second protection also. I do like the looks of it as well, but it is nice for protection too. So we are going to talk about our connectors. So when we look at these connection points, these are regular XTs. Now there's a handful of different ways to have our connections to our batteries. The different ones like this, or even larger ones like this. So something that is important is looking at these anti-spark pre-charge connectors. These are a little more on the pricey side, but they are going to not do a pop. So some of us are familiar with when we plug in our batteries and we plug these connectors, we're going to see a little spark or a pop. We'll look at a demonstration of this right now, which it is normal. It is our battery just giving that current that our controller is ready to pull. Now, I have recently learned from talking with people like Jordan Davis, who is a little more educated in this scene from me, that we do want to always have a pre-charge for our controller, essentially slowly charging that controller up. So this is ensuring more of the safety of your controllers rather than your batteries, but it is worth talking about here. Now we'll see the XT90 versions. These are still nice, just not as nice. To do a pre-charge, technically you're supposed to slowly plug it in, let it pre-charge, and then you can plug it all the way after a handful of seconds. And they do wear out a little quicker. So if you're going to go for it, we are just going to have these on all of our batteries from EMF just because we are after quality. Now, while we're looking at this, we're also going to look at our size gauging of wire. On these, we can see we have 6 gauge wire, which is pretty beefy. That is for around putting out that 200 amps. And we want to make sure that we're getting that current through and having big enough wire. So when I say fit, I mean more of how is it going to fit into the frame or whatever bike that you're building or working on, and is it going to be secure and work out without too much modification if you're not trying to do it. So we'll take an example of that here, and it is a MX, which has this bottom tray. So we have designed these to slip in and under, giving the clearance to fit in this bottom tray without any modification. So that is going to be some things that you want to look at if you are working on a build. Is that battery just going to fit in there? Where our larger size batteries, you are going to have to cut out that bracket and you are going to have to flatten down the tray, but your plastic should go back over. They may not close all the way. We'll check that out coming up here pretty soon. So general battery talk. I think one of the biggest questions I get is, what is AH, amp hour, and what is battery amps, right? So we're hearing both the word amps in that, and they're not necessarily meaning the same thing or don't necessarily have to do with the same thing. So looking here, we can kind of see that we're seeing some of our specs, and we're gonna see our AH. So when we look, we can see here we have 24 AH, other known as amp hours. Now maybe some of you are familiar with seeing AH on some other batteries that you guys might be familiar with. So yes, just like our collection of batteries here, our AH is going to mean the same thing, and it is going to be our range or our runtime. So don't hold me to it, but I tell people a lot, on average, we do see around an AH per mile. So when I say that, I mean if we have a 20 AH battery, we may see right around 20-mile rides depending on your tune, your riding terrain, and how hard you're riding on pulling those amps out of that battery. This can also matter what kind of cells you have and the quality of the build. So just in general, when you see AH or amp hours, just see that as the size of your gas tank. The larger the AH, the larger ride you're getting. I typically like to have a 40 AH battery, and that will get me around that 35-mile ride that I know I'm safe to go. So looking at our battery, we can see that it says 170 amp. Now that is our continuous amp, and there will be a peak amp. Our continuous is generally where we want to sit around to ensure the safety and we're not maxing out our batteries. So with some of these more advanced controllers, we are pulling a lot more amps and we're able to kind of use that power how we want to. So we need to make sure that our batteries are capable of pulling the amount of amps. Something more complicated like a Kelly, a Far Driver, or a Flip Sky in the 200 or more, you're going to want to make sure that you have that continuous 200 amp or more if you plan on running those controllers to their potential. Now, does it mean you have to run that many amps? No, it doesn't. But if your battery is capable of it for the future, it's always good to plan ahead and make sure that the most expensive item is going to be safe and ready for you to upgrade if you want to upgrade to something better. So I like to recommend to people, check this out and make sure that you're going the route that you really want to go for long run. If that means you're going to get a basic VVOR kit or something and maybe you want to upgrade later, maybe get a better battery now and you always have that option to pull more amps from the battery down the road. When we're looking at picking a volt, that's really going to determine how much top speed are we going to get out of this motor. So for the same motor, we could maybe only get 30 mile per hour with the controller in the right tune on 48 volt. Now with that same setup, we may see more around 50 miles per hour on a 72 volt. So I tell people who are really trying to see that higher 50 mile per hour mark or more, you really need to be looking more at a 72 volt setup. For those of us who are just trying to putz around and have a good time, the 48 volts is a great option and a little more affordable as well. I have a great time on my 48 volts doing wheelies. A lot of people think that you need that 72 volt power, and you really don't. You're really going to have to manipulate and learn how to wheelie. Power is not wheelies. It does help, but it's not what you need. So don't let that overtake you. Volts really is going to be a lot of determining your top speeds. Your amps, your battery amps is going to be a lot more of that torque and how much power can you pull out of it, not how much faster can you go. While talking about that, we can talk real quick about field weakening, which you guys do hear me talk a little bit about. We'll get a lot more into that when we do the controller video coming soon here. And we are going to go ahead and touch base on it. So your field weakening is basically going to allow you to get a little more top speed out of your motor than it's rated for. So like we're able to pull more amps into the motor and make it go faster to get to top speed faster, we'll use field weakening to get an actual more top speed out of it. So you'll see a lot of these controllers are having field weakening now. A lot of our Kelly KVDs are going to be outdated and are not going to have that field weakening option to get you more top speed. So again, we'll touch base on that later. And again, we're going to touch base on phase amps later with the controllers. Your controller is basically going to be taking those battery amps and turning them into more phase current amps to go to your motor to give that motor more power. So we'll touch base on all of that stuff once we get into the controllers. We're going to try to stick to batteries right now. So I do really hope that this can help answer some questions that I keep getting on batteries. Let me know what you guys think, if this helps and answer different questions that maybe you had or you've learned something that you weren't aware of. Let me know in the comments below. So if you have anything else to add, please do down below. As always, I appreciate you guys stopping in, and we'll catch you on the next one.